The Inheritance Experiment by Hannah-Lise Basson. A Murder Mystery. Table of Contents. 1. The Night the Clock Stopped. 2. The Investigator Who Didn't Want the Job. 3. The Will and the First Lie. 4. The Woman Who Never Raised Her Voice. 5. The Things We Owe the Dead. 6. The Heir Apparent. 7. The Return That Shouldn't Have Happened. 8. The Second Body. 9. The Trap That Watches Back. 10. The Heir's Last Choice. 11. The Last of the System. 12. Finale. The Last Echo. Chapter 1. The Night the Clock Stopped. The rain began at exactly 8:17. Later, when the town would replay the night in fragments, sirens, whispers, damp coats hanging over chairs, someone would remember the time because the old grandfather clock in Edwin Hale's study stopped ticking at 8:18. The pendulum froze mid-swing, as if startled, as if it, too, had witnessed something it was never meant to see. Marrow Bay was not a town accustomed to sudden things. It preferred gradual change, the slow erosion of cliffs, the gentle decay of paint on seaside cottages, the predictable rhythm of tides and tides alone. People lived here because nothing happened, or because something once had, and they wanted to escape it. Edwin Hale's death would undo that illusion in a single hour. He was found just after 9, face down on the Persian rug in his study, one hand curled beneath his chest, the other stretched toward the door as though he had been trying to reach someone before he fell. His glasses lay several feet away, one lens shattered. Blood had pooled beneath his temple, dark and thick, already cooling. At first glance, it looked like an accident. At second glance, it looked like a lie. The first person to find him was Clara Finch. She would later insist she had known something was wrong the moment she stepped inside the house, that the silence felt heavier than usual, that the air itself seemed to press down on her chest. But Clara had always been prone to dramatics, and the police would note that fact carefully in their reports. Still, she had screamed. The sound carried through the house, sharp and panicked, echoing off walls lined with framed photographs and books Edwin had never bothered to read. Neighbors would say later they heard it through the rain, cutting clean through the steady hush of water against stone. By the time anyone reached her, Clara was kneeling beside the body, shaking, her hands smeared red. "I didn't touch him," she kept saying. "I swear I didn't." No one had accused her yet. Edwin Hale had been many things in Marrow Bay. A philanthropist, a benefactor, a widower with a tragic past, a man whose name appeared on plaques, programs, and donation lists. He had been generous in public, meticulous in private, and, if the truth were told, quietly feared by more people than anyone would admit. Which was why, when the police sealed off the house and word began to spread, the town reacted not with grief, but with unease. Because grief implies innocence. Unease suggests questions. And Marrow Bay was about to ask them all. Chapter 2. The Investigator Who Didn't Want the Job. Detective Elias Crow arrived in Marrow Bay at 10:43, his coat already soaked through, the cuffs of his trousers dark with rain. He stood for a moment beside his car, watching the Hale residence from across the street, the house looming against the storm like a patient beast waiting to be dissected. Crow disliked coastal towns. They smelled of salt and rot, of things preserved too long and secrets buried too shallow. He had learned that years ago, during a case he never spoke about anymore, one that had ended with a confession too late to save anyone. He had asked for reassignment after that. Quieter work, paper trails, nothing that involved blood on rugs or families unraveling under fluorescent lights. Marrow Bay was not supposed to be his problem, but Detective Inspector Rowan had called him personally. "You grew up near there," Rowan had said. "You'll understand the people." Crow had nearly laughed. Understanding people was exactly what he no longer trusted himself to do. Still, he was here. Uniformed officers nodded as he ducked under the tape. The house glowed from within, warm yellow light bleeding into the rain, an indecent contrast to the body inside. Crow paused in the doorway, letting his eyes adjust, his instincts wake. Death always changed the air. It stripped houses of their pretense. The study was at the back, as if Edwin Hale had wanted privacy, even in his final moments. Bookshelves lined the walls, most of them pristine, their spines unbroken. A desk sat near the window, drawers pulled open, papers scattered in deliberate disarray. Not a robbery. Crow crouched beside the body. Male, mid-60s, blunt force trauma to the right temple, no defensive wounds visible at first glance. The fall had been hard enough to crack bone, but controlled enough to avoid chaos. Someone had known exactly where to strike. "Time of death?" Crow asked. "Between 8:15 and 8:30, an officer replied. "Medical examiner's on the way." Crow's gaze drifted to the clock, stopped at 8:18. He frowned. "Anyone touch it?" "No, sir." Crow straightened slowly. He didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in habits, impulses, and mistakes. People always left something behind, even when they thought they hadn't. He turned to Clara Finch. She sat on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket she didn't seem to feel, her face pale and blotchy, mascara streaked down her cheeks like bruises. She looked smaller than Crow had imagined, fragile almost, but experience had taught him never to mistake fragility for innocence. "Ms. Finch," he said gently, "I'm Detective Crow. I just need you to tell me what happened." Her eyes flicked to him, wide and glassy. "I came by to return a book," she said. "He lent it to me weeks ago. I kept forgetting." "What time did you arrive?" "A little after 9, maybe 5 past." Crow nodded. "And before that?" "I don't know. I wasn't here." Her voice trembled on the last word. Crow leaned back against the wall, arms folded loosely. "Did you argue with Mr. Hale recently?" Clara hesitated. It was the smallest pause, barely a breath. "Yes," she said, "but everyone did." That was interesting. "About what?" "About money, about promises, about things he said he'd do and never did." Her fingers twisted into the blanket. Edwin liked control. He liked people needing him. Crow glanced toward the study. Control always came at a price. By midnight, the house was crowded with quiet, contained chaos. A lawyer arrived, pale and sweating. A housekeeper hovered in the kitchen, refusing to sit. 2 neighbors lingered outside, pretending concern while feeding on speculation. And then there was the family. Julian Hale stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid enough to pass for composure. He was tall, handsome in a severe way, his dark hair flecked with gray at the temples. Grief had not softened him. It had sharpened him. "My father had enemies," Julian said flatly. "I've warned him for years." Crow studied him. "Enemies?" "People he disappointed. People who thought generosity entitled them to more." "And you?" Crow asked. "Did you feel entitled?" Julian's jaw tightened. "I felt owed. There's a difference." There always was. Across the room, Lydia Hale sat silently, her gloved hands folded in her lap. She hadn't cried, hadn't spoken unless spoken to. Her eyes kept drifting toward the study door, then away again, as if she couldn't decide whether she wanted to see or forget. Crow noticed. He noticed everything, especially the way she flinched when someone mentioned the will. At 1:30 in the morning, the medical examiner confirmed what Crow already knew. "Murder," she said. "Single blow, clean, deliberate." Crow exhaled slowly. Marrow Bay's illusion shattered completely. As the house emptied and the rain finally eased, Crow lingered in the study alone. He stood by the desk, flipping through Edwin Hale's papers, careful not to disturb their arrangement. That's when he saw it. A small indentation in the rug, just beneath the desk's edge. Something heavy had been moved. And moved back. Crow straightened, pulse quickening for the first time that night. Because whoever had killed Edwin Hale hadn't just wanted him dead. They had wanted something else. Chapter 3. The Will and the First Lie. By morning, the rain had drained itself into the sea and left Marrow Bay rinsed clean in a way that felt dishonest. The town woke to gulls and pale light, as if the night hadn't happened, as if Edwin Hale hadn't died on his own rug with his skull split open and his clock stopped mid-tick. Detective Elias Crow had slept for exactly 47 minutes in the back seat of his car. When he returned to the Hale residence, the house smelled like old coffee and bleach. Someone had tried to scrub the night away. A uniform met him at the door. "They're all here," the officer said quietly, as if the house might overhear. "Lawyer, too." Crow nodded and stepped inside. The living room had been rearranged with the anxious precision of people who wanted to look normal. Chairs formed a loose circle near the fireplace. The curtains were open now. Daylight fell across faces that looked too tense to belong in a morning. Julian Hale stood by the mantel, still dressed like he hadn't gone to bed. Lydia sat with her hands clasped in her lap, gloves on again, as if skin might betray her. Clara Finch hovered near the window, hugging herself. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dallow, moved in and out of the room like a ghost, lips pinched tight. And at the center of it all sat Mr. Fenton Price, Edwin Hale's attorney. He was a neat man with an oily kind of calm, the sort of calm that came from being paid to remain composed around other people's disasters. His briefcase rested on his knees as if it had weight beyond paper. "Detective," Price said, inclining his head. Crow didn't return the politeness. He took a seat where he could see everyone. "I understand," Crow said, "that you insisted on doing this now." Price swallowed. Mr. Hale's instructions were explicit. In the event of his death, the will was to be read within 24 hours, to specific parties, in this house. "Dramatic," Clara muttered. Julian's eyes cut toward her. He liked spectacle. Crow listened to the way Julian said he, not my father, not grief, ownership. Price unclasped his briefcase, withdrew a sealed envelope and held it up. The seal was a dark red wax stamp with a simple H impressed into it. "Edwin Hale executed this will 2 months ago," Price said. "It supersedes all previous versions." Lydia's fingers tightened in her lap. The leather creaked. Crow caught it. Price broke the seal. The sound, small and final, seemed to make the room shrink. He began to read. There were the usual formalities first. Debts settled, taxes arranged, funeral instructions, a charity donation, generous, expected, public-facing, the kind of thing that made a man look good even in death. Crow watched faces during those parts. Julian stayed stone still, but his eyes kept flicking to Price's mouth as if he could pull the words out faster. Lydia stared at the rug, unblinking. Clara's expression shifted between contempt and dread, like someone waiting for a slap. Mrs. Dallow stood near the doorway, hands folded, looking as if she might faint. Then Price cleared his throat. "And now," he said, "the primary bequests." Julian leaned forward. Lydia's breathing became audible. Clara stopped fidgeting entirely. Price read, "To my son, Julian Hale, I leave the sum of 100,000 rand." The room went very still. Julian blinked once, then again, slower, as if he'd misheard. 100,000? He repeated, voice careful. Price continued without looking up. "To my sister, Lydia Hale, I leave the Hale residence and all its contents, with the exception of items listed in Appendix C." Lydia's eyes lifted sharply, then dropped again. Her face had gone paper pale. Price moved on. "To Clara Finch, I leave my collection of rare first-edition novels and the sum of 50,000 rand. Clara let out a short laugh, more bark than amusement. "Oh, how generous!" Julian's voice was sharper now. "Is that it?" Price's gaze remained on the page. "There are further provisions." He turned a sheet. "To Mrs. Margot Dallow, for her years of service, I leave the sum of 200,000 rand and the coastal cottage on Drift Lane." Mrs. Dallow made a sound like a sob trapped in her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth. Julian stared at her, stunned. "You got the cottage?" Mrs. Dallow shook her head quickly. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Crow watched that too. The insistence came too fast. Price continued. The remainder of my estate, my investments, accounts, and controlling interest in Hale Maritime Holdings is to be transferred into the Edwin Hale Trust, overseen by the appointed trustee, to be dispersed in accordance with the trust's terms. Julian's eyes widened. Trust? What trust? Price's tone remained professional. It is specific. Crow leaned forward slightly. Specific how? Price hesitated, just enough to be interesting, then read, The trustee shall be Detective Elias Crow. The room erupted at once. Julian surged to his feet. What the hell is this? Clara's head whipped toward Crow. You? Who are you to him? Lydia's breath hitched so hard Crow heard it from across the room. Mrs. Dallow looked like she might collapse. Crow didn't move. He kept his face neutral, though something cold slid through his ribs. He had not spoken to Edwin Hale in years. He had not wanted to remember Edwin Hale existed. Price, sweating now, went on quickly, as if afraid the words might bite him. In addition, he read, the trustee shall receive a sealed letter from the deceased marked, For Crow, only if I am dead. This letter is to be delivered immediately. Price reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a smaller envelope. It was thick, and it was addressed in Edwin Hale's hand. Crow felt the room's attention clamp onto him like a vice. Julian's voice was low, dangerous. My father named you trustee of his entire estate. You're telling me you didn't know this? Crow held Julian's gaze. I didn't. Clara scoffed. Sure. Lydia said nothing, but her eyes were fixed on the envelope as if it might burst into flames. Crow took it from Price. The paper was dry, crisp, prepared. He didn't open it yet. Not in front of them, not while everyone watched him like he was the killer who had somehow benefited most. Crow slipped the letter into the inside pocket of his coat. That's enough for now, he said. Julian stepped forward. No, read it. Crow's eyes narrowed. This is evidence now. Price's lips parted. Detective, technically, it's... Crow cut him off. Evidence. The word landed heavier than it should have, because it was true in more ways than they understood. After the will reading, Crow pulled Julian aside into the hallway. The house felt narrower there, more intimate. The portraits on the walls, Edwin at various charity events, Edwin smiling beside politicians, Edwin shaking hands with fishermen, watched them like judges. You were surprised, Crow said, about the money. Julian's laugh was short and bitter. Of course I was surprised. That man had millions. And you expected more. Julian's eyes hardened. I expected what was mine. Crow kept his voice even. Where were you between 8 and 9 last night? Julian's nostrils flared. At home? Alone? A beat. Julian's jaw clenched. Yes. Crow filed it away. Not the answer. The beat. Did your father ever mention me? Crow asked, watching carefully. Julian's expression changed in a way that was almost imperceptible, like a curtain twitching. No. Too fast. Too clean. Crow heard it then. Something in Julian's tone. Not ignorance. Refusal. Crow leaned in slightly. That's a lie. Julian's eyes flashed. You don't know what you're talking about. Crow's voice stayed quiet. I do. People who don't know something answer differently. They hesitate. They think. They say, I don't think so, or, not that I recall. You said no like you'd practiced it. Julian's hands curled into fists at his sides. Behind them, in the living room, Clara laughed again, high and brittle, while Price tried to soothe her. Mrs. Dallow murmured apologies to no one. Lydia sat silent, staring at the floor as if she were waiting for it to open. Crow stepped back. We're not done, he said to Julian. Not even close. Julian's voice was a whisper now, close to venom. My father didn't pick you for nothing. Crow paused. What does that mean? Julian's smile was thin. It means you should open your letter, Detective. And when you do, you'll finally understand what he really was. Crow didn't open the letter until he was alone. He sat in Edwin Hale's study again, the crime scene now carefully documented, but still haunted by the shape of what had happened. The rug had been rolled back. The floorboards beneath bore the faintest stain where blood had seeped into wood. The clock remained stopped. 8:18. Crow stared at the envelope in his hands. His name written in Edwin's script looked like a dare. He slid a finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single page, folded twice, and 4 words, underlined so hard the pen had nearly cut through the paper. They will blame you. Crow's throat tightened. Below it, Edwin's handwriting continued, steady, controlled, infuriatingly familiar. Crow, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and you are exactly where I needed you to be. Do not trust the will. Do not trust the house. Do not trust the story they will all agree on by morning. The thing you're looking for is not what was taken. It's what was returned. Crow's pulse beat behind his eyes. He glanced toward the rug, the indentation beneath the desk. Something heavy moved back. And then, one more line at the bottom, smaller, like an afterthought. Start with Lydia. Crow sat very still. Because Lydia Hale hadn't spoken a word since the body was found, and in all of Crow's experience, the quiet ones were either the most broken or the most dangerous. Chapter 4. The Woman Who Never Raised Her Voice. Lydia Hale did not protest when Detective Elias Crow asked to speak with her alone. She rose from her chair with the careful grace of someone accustomed to control, smoothing the front of her skirt as though the gesture itself might anchor her. Crow noticed her hands this time. Long fingers, nails short, immaculate, not a tremor among them. They walked down the hallway toward the small sitting room at the far end of the house. The walls here were darker, the windows narrower. Edwin had used this room rarely. It was too honest a space. No audience, no performance. Crow closed the door behind them. Lydia remained standing. You can sit, Crow said. I'd rather not, she replied. Her voice was soft, composed, not cold, contained. Crow studied her for a moment before speaking. Your brother died last night. Yes. No embellishment, no qualifiers. You haven't asked how. I know how. Crow raised an eyebrow. You do? He was struck, she said calmly, on the right side of his head. Crow's gaze sharpened. How would you know that? Lydia met his eyes at last. Because Edwin was left-handed, she said. If he'd fallen on his own, the injury would have been different. Crow didn't move. That was not public information. You've thought about this, Crow said. I've lived with Edwin for 30 years, Lydia replied. You learn to anticipate the shape of his absence. Crow let a silence stretch between them. Your brother changed his will 2 months ago, he said. Did you know? Yes. Another clean answer. Why? Lydia exhaled through her nose, a faint sound of irritation. Because he told me he was afraid. Crow leaned back against the desk behind him. Of what? Of consequences. Crow waited. Lydia crossed the room and rested her fingertips on the back of a chair, but didn't sit. Edwin spent his life arranging people, pitting them against each other, promising one thing while preparing another. He told himself it was necessary, strategic. She looked away, toward the narrow window. He was wrong. Crow's voice stayed even. Was he afraid of you? Lydia turned back slowly. No, she said. He was afraid of what I knew. Crow felt the weight of that settle in his chest. What did you know? He asked. Lydia's lips pressed together. Something you haven't told anyone else, Crow added. She hesitated then, just a fraction of a second, but it was there. He kept records, she said finally, on everyone, donations, loans, favors, things he never intended to collect, until he did. Crow thought of the desk drawers pulled open, the papers scattered just enough to look convincing. "Where were those records kept?" he asked. Lydia's eyes flicked, just once, toward the study. Crow nodded slowly. "Did you see them last night?" "No." Another clean answer. Too clean. Crow stepped closer. "Lydia, your brother named me trustee of his estate. He left me a letter warning me not to trust the house, or the story everyone would agree on." Her composure cracked. Not much, just a tightening around the eyes, a shallow breath. "He would," she said quietly. "Edwin liked to pull strings even after death." Crow watched her carefully. "He also told me to start with you." That did it. Lydia's shoulders sagged a fraction, as though she'd been carrying a weight she could no longer justify holding. "He always did like to be right," she murmured. Crow's voice softened. "Tell me the truth." She closed her eyes. "I heard him fall." The words hung between them. "When?" Crow asked. "Just after 8, Lydia said. "I was upstairs. I thought it was a book. Edwin was careless with them." Crow didn't interrupt. "I went to the stairs," she continued. "I listened. I heard nothing else. No voices, no movement." She opened her eyes again. "I told myself he'd get up." "You didn't check?" "No." Crow tilted his head. "Why not?" "Because if I had," she said, voice steady but low, "I would have become part of it." Crow absorbed that. "Did you enter the study at any point that night?" Lydia shook her head. "No." Crow stepped back. "Did you move anything in that room?" Her answer came too quickly. "No." There it was. Crow nodded once, as if satisfied. "Thank you," he said. "You can go." She blinked. "That's it?" "For now." As Lydia opened the door, Crow added, "One more thing." She paused. "Your brother kept something heavy under his desk," Crow said. "Something that was removed and then returned. Any idea what that might be?" Lydia's hand tightened on the doorknob. "No," she said, and left. Crow didn't follow her. Instead, he went straight back to the study. The room had been searched, catalogued, photographed. But the indentation in the rug still lingered, subtle but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. Crow rolled the rug back fully this time. Beneath the desk, set into the floorboards, was a square outline, a hidden panel. Crow knelt, fingers tracing the edge. There were no handles, no obvious seams, just a faint groove where wood met wood. He pressed. Nothing. He tried again, applying pressure to different corners. On the third attempt, the panel shifted. It lifted with a soft click. Crow exhaled. Inside was a metal strongbox. Empty. Crow swore under his breath. So the thing Edwin warned him about, the thing that mattered, had been taken. Or had it? He remembered Edwin's words. "The thing you're looking for is not what was taken. It's what was returned." Crow scanned the room again. The desk. The scattered papers. The clock. The clock. Crow crossed the room and examined it closely. The glass face was intact, the wood frame unmarked. He opened the back panel. Inside, tucked behind the mechanism, was a thin envelope. Different paper, different handwriting. Crow's pulse spiked. Before he could open it, a sound came from the hallway. A soft creak. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Crow slid the envelope into his coat and moved to the door, opening it just as someone passed. Clara Finch froze. They stared at each other. Her eyes dropped, to his coat pocket, then back to his face. "You shouldn't be here alone," she said. Crow's voice was mild. "Neither should you." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I was looking for the bathroom." Crow nodded. "Down the hall, to the left." She didn't move. Instead, she said, "Edwin trusted you." Crow watched her carefully. "Why do you say that?" "Because," she replied softly, "he trusted me too." Then she turned and walked away. Crow stood still long after she'd gone. because if Clara Finch knew about the clock, then the lie wasn't just one lie. It was a collaboration. Chapter 5. The Things We Owe the Dead. Clara Finch liked to talk when she was nervous. Crow noticed it immediately when she sat down across from him in the kitchen an hour later, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. Her foot tapped against the table leg in an uneven rhythm, like a clock that couldn't keep time. The kitchen was bright, almost cheerful, white cabinets, a bowl of lemons on the counter, the faint smell of disinfectant lingering beneath brewed coffee. Edwin Hale had curated this room the way he curated his public image: clean, harmless, welcoming. Crow didn't believe in harmless. "Do you want a lawyer?" he asked. Clara snorted. "For what? Being dramatic in someone else's house?" "For being questioned in a murder investigation." She waved a hand. "If you arrest me, I'll make it easy. I'll faint or cry or something suitably tragic." Crow didn't smile. He waited. The silence stretched. Clara sighed and leaned back. "You're very good at that," she said, "making people talk without saying much." Crow met her gaze. "You went looking for something in the study." Her foot stopped tapping. "I already told the other officer," she said lightly. "I was returning a book." "You returned it to a dead man." Her mouth tightened. "I didn't know he was dead." Crow tilted his head. "You arrived after 9. He was killed before 8:30. She stared at him. "So?" "So someone had already been in that room before you," Crow said. "Someone who moved something heavy, and someone who put something back." Clara swallowed. Crow leaned forward. "You knew about the clock." Her laugh was too loud. "Lots of people knew about the clock." "No," Crow said calmly. "They knew it existed. You knew it hid something." Clara's eyes flicked toward the doorway. Crow followed the glance, then looked back at her. "You don't need to protect anyone yet," he said, "but you should stop lying for them." She exhaled sharply. "I'm not lying for anyone." "That's rarely true." Her shoulders slumped. "Edwin liked leverage," she said quietly. "You figured that out." Crow nodded. "What did he have on you?" Clara's fingers tightened around the mug until her knuckles went white. "My first teaching job," she said. 10 years ago. I was young. I made a mistake. Nothing criminal, but enough to ruin me if it came out." Crow waited. "He paid to make it go away," she continued. "Legal fees, silence, reputation management." She laughed bitterly. "He called it an investment." "And the cost?" "He owned me," she said flatly. "Or he thought he did." Crow's voice softened. "Did he threaten you recently?" "Yes." There it was. "When?" 2 weeks ago," Clara said. "He told me he was rebalancing his affairs, that if I wanted his continued discretion, I'd need to be more cooperative." "With what?" "With persuading someone else to comply," she said. Crow's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Clara hesitated. Crow didn't rush her. "Lydia," she said finally. That landed hard. "What did he want Lydia to do?" Crow asked. "Sign something," Clara said. "Documents. I never saw them, but Edwin said Lydia was resisting." Crow thought of the trust, the sudden changes, the fear Edwin had mentioned. "Did you confront him about this?" Crow asked. "Yes," Clara said. "Last night." Crow leaned back. "In the study?" "Yes." "At what time?" Clara hesitated again, longer this time. 8, she said. Crow's gaze sharpened. "Earlier you said you arrived after 9. Her mouth opened, closed. "Clara," Crow said quietly, "if you're lying now, I can't help you later." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "Not really. I came earlier," she admitted. "Just for a minute. We argued. I told him he couldn't keep doing this." "And then?" "And then he laughed," she said. "He said he already had what he needed." Crow watched her closely. "Did he show you anything?" "Yes." "What?" "A ledger," she said. "Names, dates, amounts, things people had done for him." Or because of him. Crow's pulse quickened. Where is it now? I don't know, Clara said quickly. He put it back. Back where? She shook her head. I didn't see. Crow studied her. Did you hit him? Her eyes snapped up. No. Did you see who did? No, she said, breathless now. I left. I was angry. I didn't want to say something I couldn't take back. Crow nodded slowly. And when you came back later, he said, you already knew something was wrong. Clara stared at the table. Yes. Crow stood. We're not done, he said, but you should stay where officers can see you. She looked up. Detective? Yes. You were right, she said quietly, about collaboration. Crow paused. Edwin didn't trust one person, she continued. He spread his secrets around, pieces here and there, so no one could move without exposing themselves. Crow thought of the missing strongbox, the envelope in the clock, the returned weight. Someone didn't just kill him, Clara said. They tried to finish his game. Crow left the kitchen with a knot in his stomach. He found Julian in the hallway, arguing in hushed tones with Price. When Julian saw Crow, he broke off immediately. You think you're clever, Julian snapped. Walking around like you own the place. Crow's gaze was level. Your father thought so. Julian laughed without humor. He thought a lot of things. Crow stepped closer. Did you know about the ledger? Julian froze. Crow watched it happen, the calculation, the shift, the mask snapping back into place. No, Julian said. Too fast. Crow nodded once. Where were you between 8 and 8:30? Julian's jaw tightened. I told you, at home. Someone saw your car near Drift Lane at 8:25, Crow said. It was a gamble. Julian's eyes flicked away. Just once. Crow exhaled slowly. Who were you meeting? He asked. Julian's voice dropped to a whisper. You have no idea what my father was capable of. Crow met his gaze. I'm starting to. Julian leaned in, close enough that Crow could smell coffee and old anger on his breath. If you open every door he locked, Julian said, you're going to wish you hadn't. Crow straightened. People say that when they're afraid, he replied. Julian's smile was thin. Or when they know what's behind the door. That night, long after the house fell quiet, Crow sat alone in his borrowed room and finally opened the envelope he'd taken from the clock. Inside was a memory card. No note, no explanation, just a small black rectangle that could destroy reputations or explain a murder. Crow slipped it into his pocket, and somewhere downstairs, wood creaked softly. Not old house sounds. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming toward his door. Chapter 6. The sound of a locked door. Crow woke before the knock. That instinct, half-trained, half-cursed, had saved his life more than once. His eyes opened to darkness and silence, the room holding its breath. For a moment he lay still, listening. Then it came again. Not a knock, a test, fingers brushing the handle. Crow rolled out of bed and drew his service weapon in one smooth motion, pulse steady in a way that felt almost unnatural. He positioned himself beside the door, back to the wall, breath slow. The handle turned, stopped. A pause long enough to mean intent. Then the sound of metal scraping metal, someone slipping a thin tool into the lock. Crow moved. He yanked the door open just as the lock clicked free. The hallway was empty. Too empty. Crow stepped out cautiously, scanning left, then right. The house was dark now, its earlier warmth replaced by long shadows and unfamiliar shapes. A single light glowed at the end of the hall near the study. It hadn't been on before. Crow advanced quietly, every sense alert. As he neared the study, he caught a smell, sharp, chemical, smoke. His pulse spiked. Crow lunged forward and shoved the study door open. The trash bin beneath Edwin Hale's desk was smoldering, thin curls of smoke rising from a wad of half-burned paper. Someone had tried to destroy something and hadn't finished the job. Crow stamped out the embers and sifted through the remains with gloved hands, charred edges, ink blotted and running, but not gone. He flattened the largest fragment on the desk and leaned closer. A name. Dallow. Below it, another. Finch. Crow swore softly. The ledger hadn't been taken after all. It had been edited. By dawn, Crow had locked the house down again. No one left without permission. No one entered without a name. Julian protested loudly. Clara paced. Lydia said nothing at all, just watched Crow with eyes that had grown sharper overnight. Crow retreated to a temporary workstation set up in the dining room and slid the memory card into a laptop borrowed from forensics. The files loaded slowly. There were dozens of them. Audio recordings, scanned documents, video clips. Edwin Hale hadn't just kept records. He'd curated confessions. Crow clicked the first audio file. Edwin's voice filled the room, smooth, measured, unmistakably pleased with itself. People always think leverage is about force. It isn't. It's about timing, about knowing when someone can't afford the truth. Crow's jaw tightened. The next file played automatically. Julian's voice, younger, angry. You can't do this. You can't keep threatening me. Edwin's reply came calm and amused. I can. And I will, because you'll do what I ask. You always do. Crow paused the recording. Julian had been lying, not about knowing Crow, about everything. Another file. Lydia's voice, brittle but controlled. If you release those documents, you'll destroy more than me. Edwin laughed softly. Only if you let me. Crow leaned back, exhaling slowly. Edwin Hale had been a spider at the center of his web, every strand carefully placed, every movement calculated. He had made enemies not by cruelty alone, but by patience. Crow clicked the final file. It was dated 3 days before Edwin's death. Video. Crow pressed play. Edwin appeared on screen, seated at his desk, the same study now sealed behind police tape. He looked older than Crow remembered, thinner, tired, but alert. If you're seeing this, Edwin said, then someone finally lost their nerve. Crow felt his stomach twist. I suspect, Edwin continued, that they'll claim it was impulse, rage, desperation. They'll be wrong. He leaned closer to the camera. I orchestrated this. Crow froze. I made sure each of them had motive, Edwin said calmly. I placed pressure where it would fracture them, because I wanted to know which of them would cross the final line. Crow's hands curled into fists. This is not suicide, Edwin said. It's an experiment. The video ended. Crow sat in silence long after the screen went black. Edwin Hale hadn't been afraid of dying. He'd been curious. Crow confronted Lydia first. He found her in the garden, standing barefoot in the damp grass despite the chill. She didn't turn when he approached. You knew, Crow said quietly. Yes, Lydia replied. About the experiment? Yes. You still lived with him. I was waiting, she said, for it to end. Crow stepped beside her. You didn't kill him. She shook her head. No, but I knew who might. Crow studied her profile. Who? Lydia closed her eyes. Julian wanted freedom, she said. Clara wanted safety. Mrs. Dallow wanted peace. She opened her eyes again. But only one of them wanted control. Crow's phone buzzed in his pocket. Forensics. He answered. Yes. A pause. Crow's expression hardened. When? He asked. Another pause. Keep him there, Crow said, and hung up. Lydia looked at him. You found something? Crow nodded. Blood, under the fingernails. She inhaled sharply. Whose? She asked. Crow met her gaze. Julian's. Julian broke in the interview room. Not loudly, not dramatically. He broke the way men do when the story they've told themselves collapses under its own weight. I didn't mean to kill him, Julian said, staring at the table. I just wanted the ledger. Crow sat across from him, silent. "He laughed at me," Julian continued. "Even then. Even when I told him I was done." Crow's voice was steady. "You struck him." Julian nodded. "He fell," Julian whispered. "I thought he was pretending, like always." Crow said nothing. "I panicked," Julian said. "I hid the ledger. Then I came back later. I didn't want it found on me." Crow leaned forward. "You returned the weight to its place." Julian looked up, eyes hollow. "I didn't know you'd see it." Crow stood. Edwin Hale's experiment was over, and it had claimed exactly who he'd wanted it to. As Julian was led away, Clara watched from the doorway, tears streaking her face. "Edwin still won," she said quietly. Crow shook his head. "No, he lost." She looked at him. "How?" Crow glanced at the study, then at the town beyond the windows, waking, unaware, still believing in quiet places. "Because you're free now," he said. "All of you." Clara let out a shaky breath. Upstairs, the grandfather clock was restarted. Its pendulum swung again. Tick, tick, tick. Chapter 7. What the Town Chose to Believe. Marrow Bay woke slowly to scandal. It arrived not with sirens or shouting, but with lowered voices in cafes, with curtains pulled back just enough to see who was speaking to whom. By noon, the story had already begun to harden into something manageable. A troubled son, a family dispute, a tragic escalation. The town liked its truths simple. Crow watched it happen from the window of the temporary command room set up in the municipal building. The sea was calm that morning, deceptively blue, as though it had not swallowed its share of secrets over the years. Julian Hale's arrest was public, efficient, and quietly devastating. No chase, no protest. He walked to the car with his head bowed, hands cuffed, jaw set in grim acceptance. The cameras caught only fragments. They didn't catch the way Lydia turned away before he passed. They didn't catch Clara Finch's hands shaking as she lit a cigarette she never finished. They didn't catch Mrs. Dallow sitting alone in the back of the house, staring at a wall Edwin Hale would never lean against again. Crow did. He always did. The press wanted Crow. They wanted his face, his words, his confirmation that justice had been served neatly and without complication. He gave them nothing. "A suspect is in custody," he said once flatly. "The investigation is ongoing." They didn't ask about Edwin Hale's experiment. They didn't ask about the recordings. They didn't ask about the trust. And Crow didn't volunteer, because some truths, once spoken aloud, didn't enlighten. They infected. The memory card was logged into evidence, sealed and locked away. But not before Crow made copies. Not for leverage, for insurance. Edwin Hale had been right about one thing. Stories didn't disappear. They waited. Crow spent the afternoon writing reports that avoided certain words: manipulation, coercion, intent. He chose conflict instead. It was a lie, but it was the kind the system preferred. Late that evening, Lydia Hale requested to speak with him one last time. They met in the same sitting room where she'd first stood instead of sitting. This time, she lowered herself into the chair. "They'll bury it," she said quietly. "Yes," Crow replied. "They will." She looked at him. "Does that bother you?" Crow considered the question. "It used to." Lydia nodded. Edwin believed exposure was the same as justice. "And you?" Crow asked. She folded her hands in her lap. "I believe survival is." Crow stood. "You're leaving Marrow Bay?" "Yes." "Tonight?" "Yes." Crow paused at the door. "He planned this for a long time." "I know," Lydia said. "He told me you were part of it." Crow turned back slowly. "What do you mean?" "He said," Lydia continued, "if it ends the way I think it will, Crow will be the only one who won't flinch." Crow felt something tighten in his chest. "Why me?" he asked. Lydia met his eyes. "Because you once walked away from him." Crow exhaled. "Yes," he said. "I did." Clara Finch didn't leave town. She stayed, though her reputation took bruises it would never quite heal from. She resigned from her teaching post before anyone could ask her to explain herself. When she spoke to Crow before he left, her voice was steadier than he expected. "He didn't own us," she said. "Not really." Crow nodded. "No, he just thought he did." She hesitated. "What happens to the recordings?" "They stay buried," Crow said, "unless someone tries to dig them up." Clara managed a thin smile. Edwin would hate that. Crow allowed himself one small, private satisfaction. Mrs. Dallow cried when Crow told her she was free to go. "I loved him," she said, as if that might condemn her. "I know," Crow replied. "That's why he chose you." She didn't understand that, but Crow did. On his final night in Marrow Bay, Crow returned to the Hale house one last time. It was empty now. The furniture draped, the rooms echoing, the study stripped of its authority. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, obedient again. Crow stood before it. "Curiosity killed the wrong man," he murmured. He opened the clock's back panel and removed the envelope Edwin had hidden there, the second one, the one Crow hadn't logged. Inside was a single page and a key. The note read, "You were always the variable I couldn't control. That's why I trusted you." Crow closed his eyes. Edwin Hale had wanted an audience. He wouldn't get one. Crow placed the envelope back inside the clock and closed the panel for good. Then he left the house. As Crow drove out of Marrow Bay the next morning, the town looked almost peaceful again. But peace, he knew, was just silence with good timing. And silence, like clocks, like men, like secrets, only lasted until someone decided to listen. Part 2. Chapter 8. The Return That Shouldn't Have Happened. Crow had learned the sound of his phone vibrating on a nightstand the way other men learned prayer. It meant something unfinished had found him again. He didn't answer it the first time. The second vibration came 10 seconds later, impatient, insistent. Crow sighed, rolled onto his back, and stared at the ceiling of his flat. Rain tapped lightly against the window. Not Marrow Bay rain. City rain. Anonymous. Safe. He picked up. "Crow," he said, "you need to come back." Inspector Rowan's voice hadn't changed. That was what made Crow's chest tighten. "I'm not assigned to Marrow Bay anymore," Crow said. "I know." Julian Hale confessed. "I know. The case is closed." Rowan exhaled slowly. "That's what we told people." Crow sat up. "What happened?" he asked. There was a pause on the line. A careful one. "They found another ledger." Crow closed his eyes. "Where?" Rowan's voice dropped. "In a safety deposit box, registered under a shell account Edwin Hale dissolved after his death." Silence filled the space between them. "That's not possible," Crow said. "That's what I said." Crow swung his legs off the bed. "I'm listening." Marrow Bay looked different 3 months later. Quieter, somehow. Not calmer, just more restrained, like a town that had learned what happened when it spoke too freely. The Hale house was sold, stripped, repainted into something aggressively neutral. Edwin's name had been removed from plaques, quietly, without ceremony. Crow noticed all of it. Rowan met him outside the station, raincoat collar turned up, eyes tired. "The ledger was authenticated," Rowan said as they walked. "Handwriting matches, paper matches, ink dates back years." "Contents?" Crow asked. Rowan grimaced. "That's the problem." They stopped in Rowan's office. He shut the door and slid a folder across the desk. Crow opened it. Names, not just the ones he knew. Judges, business owners, a city councilor, a charity director. People Edwin Hale had never mentioned aloud. Dates followed each name, and then notations. Escalation successful, pressure increased, awaiting compliance. Crow's jaw tightened. "This isn't leverage," he said. "This is programmatic." Rowan nodded. "And the last entry was added 2 weeks ago." Crow looked up slowly. Julian's been in custody for 3 months. Exactly. Crow closed the folder. Edwin didn't just plan his death, he said quietly. He designed continuity. They brought in the bank manager first. He sweated through his shirt within minutes. He came in person, the man said, voice shaking. Edwin Hale, or someone using his credentials. Same walk, same voice. Crow leaned forward. When? 10 days after the funeral. That's impossible, Rowan said. The manager shook his head. I know what I saw. Crow exchanged a glance with Rowan. Edwin Hale was dead, but someone was still wearing his shadow. That night, Crow returned to his hotel room and unlocked his laptop. He pulled out the backup drive he'd never logged. Insurance. He loaded the recordings again, scrolling slowly, methodically. And then he saw it, a file he didn't remember opening, dated after Edwin's death. Crow's fingers hovered over the trackpad. Then he clicked play. The screen filled with darkness at first, then light, a familiar study, the same desk, the same clock, and Edwin Hale's voice. Curiosity, Edwin said calmly, isn't about knowing what happens next. Crow's blood ran cold. It's about knowing who continues. The video paused, then text appeared on screen. If you're watching this, Crow, you came back. Crow slammed the laptop shut. He sat there, heart pounding, lungs burning, the weight of it settling into his bones. Edwin Hale hadn't built a web, he'd built a relay, and someone else had taken the handoff. Outside, the rain intensified, and somewhere in Marrow Bay, a clock ticked on. Chapter 9. The Second Body. Crow didn't sleep. He sat in the hotel chair with the laptop closed, staring at the blank wall as if it might blink first. The city outside kept living. Cars hissed through wet streets, distant music pulsed. Someone laughed too loudly in the hallway and kept laughing like they couldn't help it. Inside Crow's head, Edwin Hale's voice repeated like a metronome, "Who continues?" At 03:12, Crow opened the laptop again. He played the video from the beginning, this time with the volume low, forcing himself to watch every detail like it was a crime scene. Edwin's face didn't appear, just the room. The angle was slightly off, as if the camera had been set up by someone trying to copy a previous recording and failing to match the framing perfectly. The study was the same, but not. There was a new scratch on the desk's corner. The curtain hung differently. And the clock, Edwin's precious grandfather clock, ticked in the background. Tick, tick, tick. It hadn't been ticking on the night Edwin died. Crow paused the video and rewound. On the second viewing, he noticed something else, a reflection in the glass over a framed photograph on the shelf. A smear of motion, like a pale sleeve moving near the door. Someone else had been in the room while the recording was made, or the person recording it had passed through the reflection. Either way, it meant one thing. Edwin Hale's study wasn't just a memory, it was still being used. Crow stared at the paused frame until his eyes stung. Then he shut the laptop and reached for his coat. Rowan had said the house was sold, but sold didn't mean empty, and empty didn't mean safe. At 07:46, Crow stood outside the Hale residence again. The new paint was a crime. It made the house look like a brochure, soft gray, white trim, tidy hedges. It tried to erase what had happened here. The sea air tasted the same. Crow showed credentials to the private security guard at the gate. The guard's eyes lingered on the badge, then flicked to Crow's face, like he expected recognition. "New owners?" Crow asked. The guard hesitated. "Company, I think. Some kind of trust." Crow's stomach tightened. "Name?" The guard shrugged. "It's above my pay grade." Crow could have pushed, could have bulldozed his way in like he owned the place. Instead, he walked the perimeter slowly, scanning for cameras. New ones had been installed, small, discreet, expensive. Someone cared about this house now. Someone cared about what might be inside it. Crow's phone buzzed. Rowan. "Don't tell me you're already there," Rowan said. Crow didn't bother denying it. "Get me the sale records." "I'm working on it." Faster, Crow said. Rowan's pause was tight with irritation and something else. Concern, maybe. Or fear. You're doing the thing again, Rowan said. The lone wolf act. Crow's eyes stayed on the upstairs window, the one Edwin used to stand behind when he wanted to watch people arrive. I'm doing the only thing that works, Crow replied, and ended the call. He didn't break in. Not yet. He waited until midday, when the guard changed shifts. Then he approached the front door like he belonged there and rang the bell. Footsteps came from inside, measured and unhurried. The door opened. A woman stood in the doorway wearing a pale blouse and an expression Crow recognized instantly. Not surprise. Assessment. She was in her early 40s, hair pinned back neatly, her face structured in a way that suggested she'd learned to keep it neutral for a living. Her eyes flicked over him like she was counting exits. "Can I help you?" she asked. Crow held up his badge. "Detective Elias Crow." Her gaze didn't change. "That name sounds familiar." "It should," Crow said. "This house is connected to an ongoing investigation." She smiled faintly. "This house was sold. Everything inside it was legally transferred." Crow looked past her into the hallway. The portraits were gone. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something sharper underneath, like bleach. He met her eyes again. "Who are you?" "Miranda Voss," she said. "Property manager." Crow kept his expression blank. "For who?" Miranda's smile sharpened. "For the owner." "And the owner is?" Crow pressed. "A trust," she said smoothly. "Incorporated in Cape Town. Perfectly legal." Crow didn't miss the slight emphasis on perfectly. People used that word when they wanted you to stop looking. He glanced at her hands. No rings, short nails, clean, hands that didn't shake. "May I come in?" Crow asked. Miranda tilted her head. "Do you have a warrant?" Crow smiled faintly, just enough to show he could, if he wanted, turn this into an ugly scene on her doorstep. He didn't. "Not yet," he said. "But I will." Miranda stepped back half an inch, then stopped, as if she'd moved before she'd decided to. The door behind her remained open, a small invitation, or a trap. Crow's phone buzzed again. Rowan, texting this time. "Sale records, purchaser equals Morro Bay Civic Renewal Trust. Trustee signature, F. Price." Crow stared at the message. Fenton Price, Edwin's attorney. Miranda watched his face carefully. "Bad news?" Crow slid the phone back into his pocket. "No," he said. "Just confirmation." Her gaze sharpened. "Confirmation of what?" "That your trust isn't as clean as it wants to look," Crow replied. The smile slipped off her face like a mask falling. Then, very softly, Miranda said, "You shouldn't be here." Crow stepped closer. "People keep telling me that." Miranda's eyes flicked behind him, toward the street, the guard, the camera. Then she said, "Detective Crow, do you believe in inheritance?" Crow's stomach tightened. "I believe in patterns." She held his gaze. "Then you know this doesn't end with Julian Hale." Crow leaned in. "Tell me what you know." Miranda's lips parted, then a sound cut through the air, a sharp crack. Not thunder, a gunshot. It came from inside the house. Miranda flinched for the first time. Crow shoved past her, weapon drawn, running down the hallway toward the study. The smell hit him first. Smoke. And then he saw the door. The study door was half open, splintered at the latch, as if someone had forced it. Crow kicked it wide. The room looked staged. Too staged. The rug was rolled back, just like the night Crow found the hidden panel. The desk drawers were open, papers were scattered with theatrical care. The clock ticked loudly, obscene in its steadiness, and on the floor, near the desk, a man lay on his back. Fenton Price. His suit was dark and soaked through at the chest, blood spreading like ink. His eyes were open, fixed on nothing. In his right hand, clenched tight even in death, was a folded piece of paper. Crow knelt and pried it free. The paper was thick, expensive stock, like the envelopes Edwin preferred. On it, in neat block letters, someone had written, Selection requires sacrifice. Crow's pulse hammered. Behind him, Miranda stood in the doorway, pale now. "You didn't call the police," Crow said without turning. It wasn't a question. Miranda's voice shook just slightly. It wouldn't have mattered. Crow looked at Price's body again. A second death. In the same house, in the same room. A confession had closed the first case, neatly, publicly. This death ripped it open like wet paper. Crow stood slowly. "Who else was here?" he asked. Miranda swallowed. "I didn't see anyone." Crow's eyes narrowed. "Miranda, I swear," she whispered. "I heard him arguing. I heard him say he wanted out." Crow's stomach turned. Price wanted out. Out of Edwin's shadow, out of the trust, out of whatever continuity Edwin had built. "And then?" Crow asked. Miranda's eyes glistened. "Then I heard the shot." Crow stared at her for a long beat. Then he said, "Lock the front door." Miranda blinked. "What?" "Now," Crow snapped. She moved quickly, and Crow stepped into the study again, shutting the door behind him. He stared at Edwin's desk, the camera angle in the video, the tick of the clock, the perfect scatter of papers. This wasn't someone panicking. This was someone performing. Edwin had called it an experiment. Crow had thought the outcome was murder. But the note in Price's hand made it clear. This wasn't about killing Edwin Hale. It was about choosing who would carry him forward. Selection. Crow's phone buzzed. Rowan calling now, as if the air itself had warned him. Crow answered. "Price is dead," Crow said. Rowan's silence was immediate and heavy. "Where?" Crow looked around the room one last time. At the clock, the desk, the hidden panel now open like a mouth. "In the study," Crow said. "Right where Edwin wanted him." Chapter 10. The Heir Apparent. Miranda Voss sat very still at the kitchen table. Crow had moved her there deliberately, away from the study, away from Edwin's desk and the ticking clock, away from the body cooling on the floor upstairs. Kitchens were places where people told the truth without realizing it. The familiar domesticity stripped away defenses, or exposed them. Uniforms filled the house within minutes. Rowan arrived shortly after, rain in his hair, anger barely contained behind professionalism. The press would follow soon enough. They always did. Crow stayed with Miranda. "You're going to tell me everything," he said quietly. "Not because you want to, because it's the only thing that might keep you alive." Her eyes flicked up at that. "Alive," she repeated. Crow nodded once. "Edwin Hale liked to test loyalty. Price failed. You might be next." Miranda swallowed. "You think I killed him?" "I think," Crow replied evenly, "that you were placed here for a reason." She gave a thin, humorless smile. "So were you." Crow didn't rise to it. He waited. Miranda exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something she'd been holding for years. "I didn't know Edwin personally," she began. "Not at first. Price recruited me." "For what?" Crow asked. "Risk management," she said. "Information containment. Cleanup." She looked down at her hands. "When people get powerful enough, they don't want lawyers anymore. They want architects." Crow felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Architects of what?" "Continuity," she said. "Edwin's word." Crow nodded slowly. He'd expected that answer. "Price handled the legal shell," Miranda continued. "I handled the systems, redundancies, fail-safes, dead drops." She looked at him. He didn't trust any one person. He trusted process. Crow leaned forward. "And after his death?" Miranda hesitated. "He left instructions," she said. "Not explicit orders. Criteria." Crow's voice was sharp now. "Criteria for what?" "For succession." The word landed heavily between them. "You mean someone was supposed to take over?" Crow said. "Yes." "And Price?" Crow asked. Miranda's mouth tightened. Price thought it would be him. Crow let that sink in. "He bought the house," Crow said. Put it under a civic trust, controlled the assets. He was recreating Edwin's position. Miranda nodded, but he didn't meet the criteria. Crow's eyes locked onto hers. What criteria? She met his gaze without blinking. Restraint. Crow felt his jaw tighten. Price killed Edwin? Miranda shook her head. No, Julian did. That was always unpredictable. Human emotion ruins models. But Price covered it up, Crow said. Yes. And then tried to step into Edwin's place, Crow said. Yes. Crow leaned back, breathing slowly. So who killed Price? Miranda's voice dropped. Someone who did meet the criteria. The room felt smaller suddenly. Crow studied her. You're saying Edwin chose his successor after he died? Miranda nodded. Through pressure, observation, reaction. She swallowed. Through you. Crow's pulse spiked. Explain. He knew you'd come back, Miranda said. He built everything to draw you in. Price was sloppy. He wanted power. You wanted resolution. Crow shook his head. I don't want this. Miranda gave a sad smile. Neither did I. Crow stood abruptly and walked to the counter, dragging a hand over his face. Someone executed Price, he said. Clean shot, close range, no hesitation. Yes, Miranda said softly. Crow turned slowly. And you think that person is watching us right now? Miranda didn't answer immediately. Then she said, I know they are. Crow's phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. Rowan noticed it too. Don't, he said. Crow picked it up anyway. The message was a single image, a still frame. From the video Crow had watched the night before. Only this angle was different. It showed Edwin's study from above, like a security camera feed. And in the center of the frame, standing by the desk, was Crow. Time-stamped 2 hours ago. Below it, a message. You see the pattern now. You always did. Crow felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Miranda watched his face. They chose you, she whispered. Crow locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket. No, he said quietly. They miscalculated. Rowan stared at him. Crow. Crow met his gaze. If Edwin Hale's experiment was about selection, then it ends the moment the subject refuses to participate. Miranda's eyes widened. You can't just walk away. Crow shook his head. That's where he was wrong. He grabbed his coat. Get everyone out of this house, he said to Rowan. Now, no exceptions. And you? Rowan demanded. Crow's jaw set. I'm going to burn the system down. Chapter 11. The Trap That Watches Back. Crow didn't tell Rowan what he planned, not because he didn't trust him, but because Edwin Hale's system had thrived on shared knowledge. Every person who knew a piece became predictable. Crow needed unpredictability. He needed to become the one variable Edwin hadn't accounted for. He left the Hale house under police escort, allowed the cameras to see him, allowed the story to spread. Detective leaves town, case handed off, threat contained. He even booked a return train. And then he didn't board it. Crow went somewhere Edwin Hale would have hated, an archive. The Municipal Records Building sat on the edge of Marrow Bay like a forgotten apology, brick, narrow windows, fluorescent lighting that hummed with quiet despair. It housed decades of planning permissions, trust filings, zoning changes, and shell organizations layered so thick no single person could ever see the full structure. Unless they knew what to look for. Crow did. He pulled records for the Morrow Bay Civic Renewal Trust and spread them across a table in a back room. Miranda had said Edwin trusted process. That meant repetition, pattern, signature. Crow followed the signatures. Price's name appeared everywhere, but always paired, never alone. A co-signatory appeared again and again, masked behind initials and proxy firms. E.C. Crow felt the slow burn of anger rise in his chest. Not his initials, Edwin's, but not Edwin Hale. Edwin Crane, a name Crow hadn't heard in 20 years, a consultant, a systems theorist. a man Edwin Hale had once called the only person who understands scale. Crow sat back slowly. Hale hadn't designed continuity alone. He'd outsourced it. The second message arrived at dusk. No image this time, just coordinates and a time. 2200. Crow smiled grimly. They thought he was still reacting. He arrived early. The coordinates led him to the old maritime observatory perched on the cliffs south of town. It had been closed for years, too expensive to maintain, too isolated to justify reopening. Edwin Hale had once funded its restoration, then quietly withdrawn support. Crow parked out of sight and approached on foot. The building loomed against the darkening sky, all glass and rusted metal, its domed roof cracked like a broken lens. Inside, shadows pooled thick and deep. Crow stepped in. The smell of dust and salt hit him immediately. Lights flickered on, one by one, leading him inward. Someone wanted him guided. He followed anyway. The central chamber opened wide beneath the dome. Old instruments stood frozen mid-measurement, aimed at stars that no longer cared. In the center of the room stood a single chair, and behind it, a man. Late 60s, thin, precise. His hair silvered neatly, his posture immaculate. He wore a dark coat and gloves despite the mild air. He smiled when he saw Crow. "Elias," he said warmly, "you always did arrive early." Crow stopped 10 feet away. "Edwin Crane," he said. "You should be dead." Crane chuckled softly. "So should Edwin Hale. He was never built for restraint." Crow's voice was flat. "You killed Price." "Yes," Crane said calmly. "He failed." Crow didn't reach for his weapon. Crane noticed. "Good," Crane said. "That means you understand this isn't about force." "It never was," Crow replied. Crane gestured to the chair. "Sit." "No," Crane smiled wider. "That's why he chose you." Crow's jaw tightened. "He didn't choose me." "He tested you," Crane corrected, "and you passed." Crow shook his head. "You misunderstood the result." Crane tilted his head. "Did I?" "You think selection means succession," Crow said. "You think the system survives by choosing the right person to carry it forward." Crane's eyes gleamed. "That's exactly what it means." Crow took a slow step forward. "No, it survives because people are afraid to refuse." Crane's smile faltered, just slightly. Crow pressed on. "Edwin Hale thought curiosity would keep me engaged. You thought inevitability would corner me." Crane's voice cooled. "You came, so I could end it." Crane laughed, sharper now. "You can't destroy an idea." "No," Crow agreed, "but I can destroy its infrastructure." Crane's eyes narrowed. "What have you done?" Crow raised his phone. 1 hour ago, he said. Every recording, ledger, proxy trust, and dead drop linked to Edwin Hale's network was uploaded to an encrypted public archive. Timed release. Redundant mirrors. Crane's face drained of color. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I already did," Crow said, "and I made sure the metadata points back to you." Crane staggered back a step. "You've exposed everyone." "Yes," Crow said. "That was the point." Crane's voice rose, sharp with fury now. "You've created chaos." Crow met his gaze steadily. "You created coercion. Chaos is what happens when it loses its grip." Sirens wailed in the distance, closer than Crane expected. Crane laughed then, wild, uncontained. "You think this ends me?" Crow shook his head. "No, it ends the experiment." Crane's laughter died. "For men like you," Crow continued, "continuity is everything. You don't know how to exist without control." Crane's shoulders sagged. "That," Crow said quietly, "is your failure." The doors burst open. Police flooded the observatory, weapons raised, shouting commands. Crane didn't resist. He simply stood there, staring at Crow with something like grief. As they led him away, Crane turned back once. "You were supposed to continue us," he said softly. Crow replied just as quietly, I chose to stop. Outside, under the open sky, Crow breathed deeply for the first time in months. The stars were faint tonight. But real Chapter 12, finale,